Our gathering hymn this morning is Come Sing a Song With Me. If you happen to have a hymnal, it's number 346. We will be singing the first verse and then two verses appropriate for the occasion that are not in the hymnal.
Good morning, or whatever time of day it is you're watching this, you can sleep in and come to Sunday services now because this is an online service. But we do want to include the welcome at part of our service because it's so important. It's so important that we have two welcomes for you today. This one, and in our parallel service, Ben Cavaletto, the chair of our Lifespan Religious Education team, has a separate welcome for our children's and family service, which we are offering, and it's a great welcome, so I hope you watch that one too. Usually when I begin a worship service, I stand in front of everyone and I say welcome, but now we're doing these services and you're probably at home, and it does seem a little odd to me that I would welcome you into your own home, but I do hope that you feel at home in your home, so welcome home. I'm being silly, you know that, I do that sometimes, but welcome is important. And what does it mean for us as we're really having to change and adapt? One important matter is that we actually do all we can to make the technology that enables us to have online worship, to make sure that that's accessible for everyone. Those of you who are watching now, you have access, at least for now, but there are some in our community who can't afford the technology or who don't have internet access, who are not comfortable using new technology. And I'm wondering, and perhaps you are too, what about them? They're being left out. They're not welcome. And right now, feeling welcomed and included is very important. So I want you to know that here at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Salem, we're going to be thinking about this. We're going to do all we can to ensure that everyone can join us. We're a welcoming people because we believe that no one should be left out. So let's do all we can to make this a welcoming world for everyone.
We are all together in a circle of belonging, of welcome. Although we are temporarily physically separated, we welcome each of you to this community with open arms. You are a part of our circle of friends, our circle of healing, our community. Please join me in speaking our affirmation. Love is our doctrine. Compassion is our way. Here we seek to create a joyful home for free religious exploration. Build a community of caring fellowship. Nurture the hopes and serve the needs of our world. Why is a flaming chalice the symbol of the Unitarian Universalists? It is a vessel of life, of blessings. It is a cup of water to quench the thirst of our spirits, a cup of wine for celebrations. It is the light of truth to banish darkness, fear, and sorrow. It is a symbol crafted by generations past, and may it be for us a symbol of hope in these days of uncertainty, fear, and change. At UUCS, we light our chalice for all those who gather with us in spirit, for our partner church in Szymanfalva, Transylvania, Romania, and for the children and youth of the world. May this flame warm our souls and light our way until we are back together again. When we introduce ourselves to another person, we usually summarize ourselves with one word, usually our name. Hello, my name is Janet. These are greetings that initiate relationships that open our hearts and act as a bridge of connection from one person to the next. But there's another kind of one-word naming that goes on, which burns bridges, locks down relationships, and keeps us from living our promises to each other. These are not words I need to repeat here, for repeating them simply gives them more power. These are words denying inherent dignity. These are the words that undermine and attack inherent worth. For these words have one powerful, hurtful message. You are not worthy. You are not enough. Throughout my life, I've had plenty of those words, those labels ascribed to me. So many that although I may say, hello, my name is Janet, what I feel I'm saying at times is, hello, I'm worthless. Or, hello, I'm bad and wrong. I am part of this religious community because we promise not to reduce each other to terrible labels, not to strip each other of our humanity, not to ascribe levels of worthiness to each other. We need to celebrate life, to feel our inherent worth. Most of us yearn to say, hello, I am somebody, and to be greeted, hello somebody, welcome. Most of us hunger for affirmation and celebration in who we are and the gifts and blessings we bring to this world. We long to be greeted as the loving, generous, compassionate people we are. Each of us offers many blessings to the world, but sometimes we and our world might have a difficult time affirming and seeing those blessings. So I'm going to suggest an activity for you to do. Find a blank sticker, a sticky note, or any piece of paper. Take a moment and look into yourself and discover again one of your blessings, one of your gifts to the world. Write that blessing onto your new name tag and put it on. Greet yourself in the mirror with that name. Share that greeting with another person today through social media, email, or distant socializing. We are all blessings to this world. We build bridges of connection by finding, naming, and affirming those blessings, by nurturing our spirit and healing our world. Amen.
One of the most powerful messages I remember from Buddhist teaching comes from the historical Buddha's very first sermon. It's called the Dhammapada. And in that sermon, in the very opening passages of that sermon, the Buddha notes how we shape our minds, our characters, our very lives by the way we choose to think and feel and act day by day. And if you cherish and nurture your bitter, angry, fearful thoughts, you will become more so yourself. And if you cherish and nurture kind and compassionate and loving thoughts, then you become more so yourself. Just as a potter shapes a bowl, so do we shape our lives. And this is why we cherish and nurture the ideals of compassion and gratitude. I want to put a quote up here that you can look at. It's from Albert Einstein. And he says that our task must be to free ourselves by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty. And I would invite you to pause for a second and reflect on what is compassion asking you to do today? What can you do? What compassionate gestures can you make to others, to your family members, to your surrounding community? I want to introduce you to a new term I heard about, came down from Canada. It's called caremongering. Caremongering instead of fearmongering. We're called to do some caremongering now, and I'll be talking about that more in future services. Right now I want to shift though to gratitude. I'm taping this on March the 22nd, and most of you might not be aware that this is a day that has great significance for me. It's a day that I feel immense, boundless, undying gratitude for somebody who died this day in 1827. The vast treasure house of music he bequeathed to the world is just unbelievable. And you know who I'm talking about? It's Beethoven. I feel such gratitude, and I hope that you find something in your life for which you feel deep, deep gratitude, because that shapes our lives and our characters as well. I want to leave you with a quote from Hepzibah Schlierbach, who said, "Who is wealthier, the billionaire who is obsessed with acquiring more, or the person who has just enough and is content and is deeply grateful?"
The Reverend Fred Rogers said, Some days, doing the best we can may fall short of what we would like to be able to do. But life isn't perfect on any front, and doing what we can with what we have is the most we should expect of ourselves or anyone else. I'm a big fan of Mr. Rogers. He taught us that one of the best ways to get through hard times is to talk to each other about our feelings. That's a good idea, no matter what age you happen to be.
These are anxious times, aren't they? Boy. But you know, I'm also becoming more aware of the blessings in the midst of this turbulent time. Every night, just for my spiritual and physical health, I take these long walks through the neighborhood, and I find myself drifting above the gravitational pull of anxiety and just naturally drifting to loftier realms of thought and feeling, being more aware than ever before of how precious and fragile many things are. And this serves to deepen my appreciation for the many wonderful relationships I have with so many of you who are watching this broadcast, and I wish you could be here we could interact today. I have so many loving relationships with so many members of the congregation and my life, and so many other people too in my life. So many people, the relationships I have, it just astonishes me how many wonderful relationships I have. And it just feels so spiritually intense to me right now. My feelings of love and gratitude are magnified by the intensity of this time. And this rich feeling, this intense gratitude and appreciation such as I feel for, and this is going to make him blush. He's standing off camera about 6 feet away right now because we're keeping our distance. But the appreciation I feel for Salem's saintly economic guru, Dr. Russ Beaton. Russ has done so much good for our community over the years in more ways than I could begin to mention. And I cannot in good faith praise Russ this way without also shining my loving light on Delana, Russ's wife of, is it 46 years?
58.
50 what?
58.
58, wow. 58 years. The chronicles of her contribution to the common good in our community is worthy of mention, but I know she'd rather that we just cut to the chase. So trust me on this, to know the Beatons is to love them. Now, the usual complaint against academics is that they are ivory tower intellectuals. Dr. Russ Beaton, Professor Emeritus of Economics from Willamette University. But Russ is not your typical academic. He's a socially, and I don't know if there is such a thing as a typical academic. I don't like to trade in stereotypes, but Russ is certainly a socially conscious activist economist. He gets out into the world and promotes an economic vision that is inclusive, it's life-affirming, it's sustainable. I remember a few years back listening to you, Russ, at the Occupy movement encampment downtown. You were giving accessible lectures and engaging in dialogue with so many of us. It was everybody's down there. All races and classes were down there at the park, and we were all yearning for a more inclusive and life-affirming economy than the destructive one we have right now. It felt like history in the making. I was so excited. And during those heady days of the Occupy movement, I naively and idealistically imagined that radical change was on the horizon. Well, things didn't unfold exactly as we wished. Indeed, things have gotten more unequal, a lot worse in many ways. But the Occupy movement did serve a purpose. It made the general public more aware of the inequities and fatal flaws in our current economic system. And now, when we say the 1%, everybody knows what we're talking about. But now, this is different. This is different. This is bigger than Occupy. We're facing this pandemic with all its epic proportion dislocations in our world. And we all know that change is coming. This worldwide pandemic is exposing flaws and weaknesses in our current economic system in ways that will be impossible to ignore any longer. So the impetus for change will be, I believe, unstoppable. Yet we have choices we can make as to which kind of world we will live in once this is over, and let us hope and pray that this is going to end soon.
Perhaps the most significant shift in my spiritual life over the past few decades has been an ever-deepening appreciation and recognition of our need for community, of what Jewish philosopher Martin Buber calls I-thou relationships. So I was really struck the last few times I met with Russ when we were talking about the book that, whoops, laying off camera here, this book that he and his brother David Beaton have written, The Economics of Hope, and he's going to talk about this, plus some other things, once I close my mouth. And in these conversations, Russ kept mentioning how important community was, and I could tell this was really resonating with me, and I could tell this wasn't just his opinion, this was his life. Building community by offering his gifts is what Russ Beaton does. And Alana. What great shining souls they are in our community. Kind and compassionate, wise, forbearing, dedicated to the common good. They've done so much good, and it's a joy to know both of them, and I really do love them. They're just such wonderful people. It's one of the great gifts of ministry, the people that you get to meet in the community. So, Russ, if you're not blushing too much, would you please come share your wisdom with us?
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, or wherever you are. It's a pleasure. Before I get started, and we have had a few moments for me to stop blushing from Rick's very kind introduction. He's still here in the room, so I'll get to him later. I need to tell you a little story. This is not the first time I've been here. I spoke here 8 or 10 years ago now on urban growth boundaries or environmental education or some such thing that I have a habit of being involved in. And I'd spoken to church groups quite often, but I'd always showed up to a study group or a committee of outreach or something like that, a group of people after the sermon. And we would share coffee and donuts, have a nice chat, talk about whatever we were there to talk about, and I thanked them for the donut and went home. When I got here and got put up, much to my horror and surprise, I found I was the sermon. Well, a moment of panic, and I realized this is a little different than a church group I'd spoken to before, and quickly I thought, can I relate urban growth to sin or something like that? And failing that, though, on the spur of the moment, I simply went ahead and did whatever I was intending to do when I got there. It went fine, and one thing I learned about this congregation is that your social outreach committee is the committee of the whole. And that's one thing I really appreciate about this place. This time, however, I am prepared, and with regard to my preparation, I have some good news and bad news. The good news is that I do indeed have a PhD in religion. The bad news is it's the religion of the marketplace. And it doesn't really speak to anything of moral value a whole lot anymore. And so this time, however, I'm ready to present to you something that is more appropriate for a sermon. I do have an admission, though. In the latter part of my career, and especially since I retired more years ago than I would like to remember, I've had a bit of a falling from grace, and therefore, in part, I'm here today to beg your forgiveness. Economics is a discipline that normally doesn't include much of values. We are encouraged to be consumers, and in fact, economic analysis in the discipline that I'm used to, it extols value-free economic analysis and not value-based. Value-based analysis or normative thinking is somehow looked down upon in the economic science. At least it likes to pretend occasionally that it's a science. To that end, I'd like to say something to you that and get it off my chest with regard to a viewpoint about economics that it doesn't have a lot to do with the book. Oh, well, it probably does. But it's a principle that I want to express to you. If I were still teaching, I'd have a blackboard. You thank your lucky stars. I do not. but I'm going to have you imagine a supply and a demand curve, at least a demand curve. On this axis is price. On the horizontal axis is quantity. And a demand curve does nothing more than say, well, if you have a certain price for a good, how much of that good will you consume? So any point on that demand curve is how much you would buy if that were the market price of that item. Let's imagine a demand curve for Teslas. Everybody is on that demand curve somewhere. For me, probably $20,000, maybe something like that. Or someone with a lot more income than I, maybe $50,000 or something higher. So up here is the price, at a very high price, let's say $60,000 to $80,000. The point would be very, very small. As you lower the price of a Tesla, people move down the demand curve. In other words, more and more people would become willing to buy that good. Now, a Tesla is a pretty expensive car. We know that. So where does a Tesla actually sell? $60,000, $50,000, $80,000, I don't know. I don't pay a lot of attention to it, since my particular price for Teslas is quite a ways away from the market clearing price. Say $20,000. A homeless person would be on the demand curve for a Tesla. Might be $500 or $300 or something like that. Well, clearly, the homeless person and I are not going to get to buy a Tesla because the market price is up there somewhere. Therefore, the demand curve for Teslas is going to have very rich people up there in the price range at which it will sell, and the rest of us arrayed down the demand curve at some point. What's that got to do with anything? Well, let's suppose we have a lot of inequality in that economy, in that culture. If you have a lot of inequality, then you have quite a few perhaps, rich people, and a whole lot of poorer people. The rich people are going to be the ones that get to buy the Teslas. The rest of us don't. Okay, so that's no problem. I'll get a Prius or something, and I'll worry about the homeless person who's pushing a shopping cart around town, maybe. But the point is that if you have a lot of inequality, that market for Teslas is still going to be very vibrant with those people. And what that means is then that economy will begin to produce a lot of Teslas and will not produce as many of the basic needs that the rest of us might have. Therefore, even though a traditional economist would say a supply and demand curve, or a demand curve, is a value-free item, in effect, if you have an economy with a lot of inequality, the demand curve makes the biggest value judgment you could ever imagine. It says some people get to consume things and some people do not. If a demand curve is to be really a value-free item, then what needs to happen is all potential buyers of that product need to have approximately the same income. And there's a very important conclusion here. Economic analysis does just fine if there is a lot of equality in that system. To the degree that that system has a lot of inequality, economic analysis is a gross value judgment. So when you hear people say, leave it to the market is a value-free entity, don't believe that in a system that has a lot of inequality. And in fact, that inequality itself makes the value judgment even more extreme. Now, let's get to the book that Rick mentioned in introduction. My brother and I wanted to, at our advanced age, we wanted to write a book that mattered, or at least potentially mattered. The last thing we expect in the world is it becomes a New York Times bestseller. But we'd like it maybe selfishly to have that potential. Therefore, what are the big problems of this society? We have two. The rampant inequality that bedevils us every day in almost every way. Number one, that's an internal economic system-based issue. It has to do with the artifacts of our system. Number two, though, we have a climate change problem. That is an existential threat to our natural environment. So we begin the book with two fundamental premises. Inequality and climate change are the two major threats to our culture. Either one of them more than has the potential to take the entire culture down if we fail to solve it. Indeed, given the systems approach, my brother is a systems analyst, was for many years sort of the head of computer instruction for the state, and he was hired by the state of Oregon away from NASA. So he has some interest in systems analysis. After years of teaching environmental economics, so do I. So the book methodologically begins with the premise that everything is connected to everything else. In that context, it's our strong feeling that if you don't solve inequality, it will ruin the climate. If you don't solve the climate, it will rupture our inequality thinking. I could carry on more about that at another time, but the systems analysis methodology dictates the approach that we make to the book. The book has three parts. The first part explains the economic crisis as we see it. The middle part goes with the climate and energy situation. Climate problems are nothing more than energy conversion run amok. And if there's any way we're ever going to get a handle on the climate issue, it has to start with a rational energy policy. The third part of the book, and the one that I'm mainly here to talk about today, I think, although I won't talk much longer, I'm going to give Rick an opportunity to ask me a question or make a comment here in a moment. I must say, I'm accustomed after 40 years of college teaching to having an audience in front of me, and especially near the end of my career, my teaching style was very collaborative, and I depended a great deal on reactions from the audience to get through the day. You're, I hope, reacting, but I can't see you out there, so there we go. The third part of the book speaks to people in communities as to what we can do about these two overriding problems. I've read many good books on it. I imagine you have too, books and articles that are wonderful analyses of one aspect or another of those two problems. At the end of the book, then, we look eagerly for solutions, and it distresses me to find that very often, even though I found the book wonderful, there weren't any solutions I could directly do anything about, especially as one individual. So my brother and I faced this problem, and we determined in the book to start at the very bottom. How can you do something individually about these problems? Indeed, there are many things you could do in adjusting your own lifestyle. But what becomes really important is what you can do in community, what you can do with maybe only a few other people. Start a business or fund nonprofits or whatever you might do. So, yes, indeed, acting as an individual is still very challenging. But acting in small groups is not as challenging, and we hoped to send messages through the final part of the book as to what we do with the local economy. Yes, the book tends to talk about economics, the economics of hope, but it gets into other social sciences too. Many of my colleagues in economics, in fact, many of my colleagues in every discipline, tend to forget that disciplines overlap and intersect. You can't just be an expert in one thing and hope to affect society in really positive ways, especially in the ways society needs to be moved these days. So the final part of the book goes through economic sectors that we can do something about. Food, energy, local manufacturing, local economic development efforts. We all hear things like that. As an economist here in Salem, I have been involved in economic development efforts practically over the years, and I have some real problems with the way that is done sometimes. Finally, local finance. How can we get money together to do this? It all starts with, well, how do we reclaim the money that we took from, that we gave to Wall Street and that we need to take back? Rick referred earlier to the Occupy movement and the 1% and the 99%, and at least that language, I agree with him. We haven't done as much about that issue as we could have. But at least the taxonomy of referring to the 1% and 99% remains with us, and I think there's hope there. My one-liner is, I wish we had two political parties where one is clearly the party of the 1% and the other tends too much to be the party of the 10%. So we need to include all stages of the income distribution in our actions, I think. The bottom line of the book, in terms of what we can do, is that, and one thing I haven't mentioned is a great deal of the book does traces our ills back to global corporate monopolies, and it's the economic system run amok to its ultimate end of globalization that are really responsible for A, much of the climate abuse, and B, much of the inequality that we find today. So I haven't gone into that, but the third part of the book therefore gets to reclaiming our economic health and our economic determinism, if you will, reclaiming it for ourselves in our own community. And the point we make is that we've become much more aware, almost since we finished the book, of its importance than we were as we were writing it. The point we make is that if we start building up those sectors of basic needs that we realize need to happen, and build a more resilient, sustainable, recession-proof economy, if you will. It may sound like going back to the old days, but I don't think it is. But the more we do that, the more we actually inoculate ourselves from the global breakdown that, with the failure to handle inequality and the failure to handle climate change, we may well be thinking. That is, the global economy may be letting us all down, and we could end up with a local economy as the absolute best economic option that we could be looking at. When you stop and think about it, though, and I think here's my main message for today, the act of working together to form a local economy that's more viable than it is now is an act of building community. And the globalization kick that we've been on, when you think about it, it is a community-destroying exercise. Because the global economy, the message of the global economy is the act of production and the act of consumption have nothing to do with each other. Produce something in China, consume it in New York. And we are urged to think that way as consumers. We are urged to think that, oh, the global economy will take care of us. We are at its mercy. We need to cooperate with it. And it's that attitude, on the side, that attitude that affects chapter 19 in the book, which is a new local economic development strategy. Because what we seem to be doing now to us says to a global corporation, come local, come locate in our community, save us. We're passive, we're helpless, we cannot save ourselves, we're going to rely on you to do everything from give us the goods we need to employ us. As it turns out, the global corporations don't do a very good job of employing us. Some years back, a survey was done. The top 200, Fortune 200 corporations produce 26% of the world's output, just about a fourth. And would you like to guess how many of the world's people that are in workforce they employed? I would have very little problems with them if in producing a quarter of the world's output, they employed a quarter of the world's people. The answer is they employed 1/3 of 1% of the world's people. To that end, if you extend that out into infinity, as a mathematician would do, the goal of our current economy must be to produce all of the world's goods with none of the world's workers. And clearly that would simply not work. So the bottom line, though, is that by bringing the act of production and the act of consumption back closer together, not only are we working in the opposite direction that the global economy is pushing us, we are insisting that you build an economy that also builds community. And I think that I would hope for a group such as this, such as we all ought to be, incorporating values into everything we do, that we get rid of that value-free economics and we enter into a community capitalism, if you will, that is a community-building economics. At that point, I'm going to ask Rick if he has any comments or questions he'd like to shoot at me from off camera.
Russ, that was great. And I jotted down some notes while you were talking, and I wanted to, first of all, how can we get the economics of hope? I think it should be a New York Times bestseller. So that's one question for you to answer when you get back in front of the camera. So number one, and I wanted to, I'm going to ask Russ a few questions, but our hope is that by Sunday we will be able to have you be able to interact with Russ. We're taping this on Wednesday, by the way, but that by Sunday we will have an opportunity for us to have a large Zoom meeting, and we'll let you become aware of that technology as soon as we know how to implement it. But you'll have a chance to interact with Russ too. So stay tuned for announcements about that. So I had some questions. When I was reading the news recently about a medical supply contractor, I think in Missouri, he said, you know, why can't we make ventilators? He said, it's not so easy. You know, we have to get parts from all over the world to do this thing. And so that's a problem. We need to make ventilators right now, and we need to make them quickly. So I want to have you comment on that, perhaps, and just any thinking that you have in regards to the table's been turned over now, and your thoughts on how we can move ahead now. We have a real opportunity to make some changes because of the pandemic. It's really changed our world. I have a couple of other questions, but I think I'm going to... Oh, my final question is, I think our congregation would... You already gave us some sense of how we can be involved and how we can be collectively involved as a congregation. If you have ideas about that to share with us, that would be great. So that's enough. And I'm going to put Russ back in the seat, so we'll pause for a second and he'll get the chance to answer questions.
Well, thanks, Rick, for those questions. And I really look forward if we can get Zoom together to interacting with you Sunday as you hear this. First question, he said, how do you get a hold of the book? Well, that would have been an easier question to answer before the virus. But if you can chase me down, I have a bunch of copies. But it is available at Amazon, $17.95. It's on Kindle. It's on ebook. Fine. I say that with a little bit of guilt because we kind of criticized Amazon at one point in the book. But also, I intend to, and I have not been able to now with the virus, it will be for sale at the book bin and at Willamette University bookstore.
And we can make it available here.
And I would be delighted to bring a box of them and sit here after a service and sign them even for you.
We'll do that.
And I'll sell them to you at a discount. How's that? Other question, Rick. Zoom Sunday, if you can get that working, I would be glad to answer questions and hear your comments. If I were to proceed in community in Salem, and my brother and I have talked about options for doing this, as to how to implement something. If I had a choice, incidentally, between being a New York Times bestseller and having something actually happen in Salem with regard to the book, I would happily choose the latter, even though the income might be better with the New York Times option. I would get people together, and I would start with an example, a homely little example that we use in the book. And that is producing starting a shoe manufacturing company in your local area. We do that in the book. That's the example we use in the local manufacturing sector of the book. But we have also imagined some business plans, if you will, of a totally energy self-sufficient greenhouse growing food for local consumption all year round. A hemp-based industry where we use the hemp oil or hemp fiber, produce our own clothing. That has links that we explore in the book back to the agricultural sector surrounding Salem. Talk about building community. We need to build community in the urban-rural divide sort of area as well. Urban-rural divide, I don't need to remind you, in Oregon right now, as it evinces itself in such things as the legislature walking out to stop a climate change bill, this kind of stuff. You know, is there work to do there? You bet. But we feel that we could recommend to people businesses that could start in that manner. My first community-based effort to do something like that would be to get you together and have a workshop where your ideas about what you buy and what you're willing to consider, what you think we ought to be willing to consider producing, and see if we could go from there. Here again, we don't have all the good ideas in the world, but collectively in our community gene pool, I'm sure we would. And then the question is how to finance things like that. And this is an area where clearly I have had some expertise, having taught investments at Willamette for many years. One of my PhD fields is in finance. One of the things we have thought about is how to start a community bank or credit union. The whole theory of the finance chapter 17, I believe, is that Wall Street has all the money. Where did they get it? Well, they don't have money. They have a claim on our wealth. I mean, they have money, but that money is a claim on the wealth that you and I all own. Wall Street has the bunch of money because we gave it to them, and we need to take it back. And
how can you take it back? Have you taken it back, Russ?
Well, as some of you may know, and I'm reluctant to get into this, I will get into it, Rick, but I'm reluctant to get into this because I am very leery of using ourselves as a good example. So I'm going to tell you at the end of this how I think you ought to assess what I'm going to say. Yes, we have taken it back. I pulled 2/3 roughly of my academic pension after 40 years of toiling in the ivory tower. I pulled about 2/3 of it back, and we bought a house which we're renting to 5 homeless women. Most of their payments, we feel some guilt here, most of their payments come from their meager Social Security. But what we do feel good about is 4 of the 5 women living in our house came to us from Samonka Place, which is local, the UGM homeless capability for women. So is at least taken 4 women off the street to replace the ones that we put in our house. We call this Hood House because it is on Hood Street. Some of you may have heard about it already, since it got more publicity than we had expected or hoped when we opened it last fall. We drive the rent down as low as we possibly can and come close to equating the return we were making on that pension money from Wall Street. And lo and behold, where we were pulling some money, which we had to, out of the pension monthly, it wasn't annuitized. In other words, we hadn't converted it to a lifetime income. We were just taking what's called a systematic withdrawal. We will earn about the same as on the systematic withdrawal on the rents as we were making on Wall Street. And roughly the investment in New York had to make about 5% rate of return, or else when we pulled out our systematic withdrawal, the capital value that we had invested in New York would diminish. If it made more than 5%, then the capital value would go up. So, in other words, we were digging into the principal in order to survive and or to get the supplementary income that we needed. And in hopes that the market would continue to appreciate enough to keep the capital value about even. We get that now from the rent, or a little less than that from the rent, but it doesn't dig into the capital value because the house is our capital value, and we fixed it up nicely, and it's a very solid house, and it's, I must believe, quietly appreciating as we speak. So, the message I do want, or don't want to send to you is that we're martyrs somehow for doing this. No. Yes, we're taking homeless people off the street. Great. I feel good about that. And everybody who's become aware of Hood House compliments us more than we deserve for doing that. But what I do want you, the message I do want you to take is that you might be able to do that too, or any of us might be able to do that too, collaboratively and collectively. And we are better off economically, both in terms of our income and our wealth, than we were before. So don't honor us and don't applaud us for doing that. It's a pure exercise in self-interest. You're right, I am an economist, and somehow or other we always get it back to self-interest, don't we? So there you are. And it's an example. We took our money from Wall Street. The difference, and these days, as we watch the market tank on a daily basis, it's gone down about a third since the coronavirus thing hit. We watch it go down a couple thousand one day and up a couple thousand the next, after having gone down a lot. Those 5 homeless women sitting in that house have probably saved us $50,000 to $75,000 by now. I just love them.
Thanks a lot, Russ. You've given us a heck of a lot to think about. And in fact, I would like to invite us all to just spend a period of time now silently reflecting, closing your eyes, envisioning in your mind's eye the world that can be. Economies that serve the common good, economies that build community, economies that provide a social safety net for everyone, economies where there's no more poverty, especially for our children, economies that serve us all. A better world can come. We can help build it. Let's simply sit and meditate in a spirit of love on the world that we can build and that we are called to build. I'm just going to invite us to sit for just a moment, and then I'll ring our familiar singing bowl. You probably missed it, and it's sitting right here, so you'll get to hear it in a second. So I'm just going to take a deep breath. Not a bad thing to do during these times, to remember that you can return to your breath and reclaim your center and be calm again. And think of the love that we share and how that love motivates us to do so many wonderful things in our world. And I bow to you. I bow to all of you in this community.
When we gather together in our sanctuary, we take up an offering. It is an expression of thanks for the blessings of life, abundance, community, and spiritual well-being. In these uncertain times, it's also very practical. Although we are temporarily unable to gather in our beautiful church building, the expenses, including staff wages, utilities, and other bills, are very real and must be paid. The finance team is working hard to create a budget for the 2021 budget year. So please be sure to submit your pledge forms. Your pledges and weekly donations may be made through PayPal by visiting our website, by mail, or by visiting the church office. Our Share the Plate recipient for March 29th is the LRE Fund. Before we extinguish our chalice, we will kindle the light of our social justice candle to symbolize the great works that are done through the many ministries of this congregation. It is the work of our ministries to act with passion when we encounter inequity, to be loving when we encounter hatred, to be courageous when we face pain and separation. Keep the light and warmth of this chalice in your heart and share it with everyone you can throughout the coming week.
Wow, this pandemic has really thrown many things into disarray in our world, and so here we're lagging just a little bit in our stewardship campaign. So I wanted to give you an update on this. It's come a long way towards meeting our goal, and I want to thank all of you who have participated. I'm so grateful for your offerings. We have a bit more distance to go, and we do need your help, especially if you haven't had an opportunity to submit an estimate of giving form. Here at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Salem, we do a lot with a little. We have reduced staffing hours. None of our employees is more than half-time. We stretch our dollars to fund our shared ministry and thereby bless one another and our surrounding community in so many ways. And we rely upon and trust in the generous financial support from you, our friends and members, and now more than ever, we recognize the value of our community and the blessings of our beloved congregation. So in order to keep staffing and services at the current level, we need another $20,000. Sounds like a lot, but for us, we can do it, I know. We need another $20,000 to meet our goal, and I trust that we're going to make it and maybe even exceed it, because I think we're motivated to be generous today, knowing that it's needed. If you haven't signed an estimate of giving form, I urge you to do so. And if you have, but you would like to add some to your pledge to help us meet this goal, this would be most helpful too. Look for instructions on how to do this now. Thanks.
Our closing hymn today is Winds Be Still. If you happen to have a hymnal at home, it's number 83.
So we can't join hands today to say our closing words. We can't place our hands on one another's shoulders either. But we can hold one another in each other's hearts as we say our closing words. Would you please join me as we say those closing words? May faith in the Spirit of life, hope for the community of earth, and love for the sacred in one another, be ours now and in all the days to come.